Jennifer Laewetz is a former Conservative staffer and a member of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, and she was among dozens of people hit with cease and desist letters after posing serious questions about the nation's governance. The legal threat letter that she received accused Laewetz of harassing the leadership of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan and, to quote directly, falsely perpetrating untrue communications that, redacted, is Métis, but not your kind of Métis, and falsely claiming, redacted, as an unelected rando from Quebec. These communications by statement, interference, or innuendo are blatantly untrue, are harmful, unjustified, and in some instances may give rise to a legal claim against you, as they have caused and are continuing to cause reputational harm and other damages, including significant mental harm and anguish to redacted, and for which our client will hold you fully accountable. Now, Laewetz denies she did anything other than quote one of the leaders directly about his own Métis heritage. However, Laewetz has now been barred from attending meetings for asking about financial oversight. But Jennifer Laewetz won't be silent. Even though her story has been largely ignored by the mainstream media, Laewetz is tonight on the Gunn Show to discuss the futile attempts to silence those Métis voices calling for change and transparency. Here's her story. So joining me now is Jennifer Laewetz. She is from Saskatchewan. Jennifer, before we get into why we're talking to each other today, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and where your focus of your political activism is?
Yeah, so I am from Saskatchewan. I'm from a First Nation community in southern Saskatchewan. I've lived here my entire life. University of Saskatchewan alumni. My background is in political science with a proficiency in Indigenous governance. So a lot of my career was first and foremost in government. I worked for a Conservative MP from Saskatchewan for over 6 years, and then wanted to take that experience of knowing the inside and outside of government into political advocacy. So I've been kind of a fierce voice in the Indigenous realm for breaking down the barriers for Indigenous people to exist in whatever political camp they see fit, and then also strengthening governance. So a lot of my work now is revitalizing nations and getting us into a place of long-term sustainability, prosperity, and self-reliance. That's a big thing, is to get out of that cycle of relying on government. And yeah, so that's where a lot of my advocacy has been, and it hasn't been a smooth ride, but it's been a ride nonetheless. So
yeah, it sounds to me like you have some expertise in Indigenous governance, and I think in accountability and sort of what needs to happen to get certain First Nations to a certain level of self-sustainability. And how does that run you into the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan? Like, what problems, I guess, did you identify there?
there's, when it comes to Indigenous governance, it's obviously very complex, no matter if you're dealing with First Nations, if you're dealing with Métis people. But for me personally, a lot of my takes are rooted in ensuring that we're taking the capacity that the federal government is giving us and actually legitimately creating long-term sustainable solutions. So when I'm observing government structures that are almost creating more, self-reliancy or whatever it might be, that's kind of where my focus goes. And then when I start noticing that high level corruption, that's what like really the light bulb goes on, because in our systems there's so much that people don't understand, and it's very easy for people to say, oh, there's corruption, there's mismanagement, but a lot of the time it's just dealing with crappy systems. But with the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, it was very interesting because my local regional director from the city I live in was actually suspended from the table until she apologized to the CEO. And that's where the alarm bells started going off for me, because I was like, whoa, 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 a CEO in an Indigenous governance is already unique in itself, because that's not typical in government structures, in federal politics, provincial politics, and Indigenous government. So I'm like, whoa, 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 a CEO, like this isn't a corporation. And, I had seen their press conference, I had seen their statements where they were being told that they had allegedly harassed the CEO. Their complaints against him were unfounded, but his were upheld. And when I started kind of digging deeper, I'm like, where did the CEO come from within the ministry and the federal government with the Métis Nation? Because they used to be under third party management. Because when a government can't manage themselves, the federal government essentially comes in, allegedly, in my opinion,
Mhm.
to help you manage yourself. And this guy was working on the government side of things. And then before you know it, he's the CEO. And then there's an MNLA last fall, which is their legislative body, essentially, have a meeting, and he's presented a Métis card. But he's, from Quebec or Ontario, one of the two. And all of a sudden, he's given a Métis card. So I guess there were a lot of questions regarding that. How did this come to be? And, we're seeing, even during the Bill C5 meetings, we're seeing the president shaking hands with the prime minister. And we're like, oh, everything looks really good on paper. But behind the scenes, we have people asking questions that are barred from the table. I've went through their annual report, and I'm seeing, $117 million from the federal government to operate. And I'm like, what is going on? And I have never been threatened legally so quickly by a body ever. And that was what raised questions for me. It was like they were attacking academics, activists, Métis lawyers. And I was like, there's a bigger picture here for sure.
Yeah, so, and we'll get to, the legal threats leveled at yourself and basically anybody who is asking any questions. But what specific questions do you think are not being answered here? You sort of touched on a few, but I see people protesting, looking for a forensic audit. I had no I not that I had no idea, but for me to go to my local community, I can actually just go online and see where all the money's going. Um, and I don't think a lot of Canadians understand that that is frequently not the case in Indigenous and Métis communities.
It's very interesting because First Nations is a lot different. I hear a lot of
Hmm.
conversations where people say, Justin Trudeau did get rid of the Transparency Act. I would caution on that by saying that there are still, almost like safety measures in place,
Yeah.
so that nation members aren't taken advantage of. A lot of nations still submit their audits, but also the funding is so heavily regulated that if your reports aren't done, the funding is cut off. ISC does still have that magnifying glass on nations. Granted, it's more bureaucratic now than it's ever been, but with the Métis Nation, they're not under those same parameters. So we're kind of going off of what we can see, and it's a little bit more tricky because it almost seems like they're not even under, in my opinion, as much scrutiny as First Nations are. So it's almost like this body that a lot of people aren't paying much attention to.
Yeah.
That I'm like, whoa, like look at this. This is a government. It's not. It's registered, I believe, as a nonprofit. Maybe I don't even know how that's done, but the federal government is funding them to the tune of over $100 million a year, and it doesn't seem like many people are paying attention to that. So that's where my questions came in: is like, how are they managed? How is the federal government ensuring safe barriers in there so that it's not mismanaged, it's not misused, so there's no corruption or fraud or any of those things. But I didn't see as much heavy scrutiny on them as I do with nations.
So how does the governance structure work? Is it, like voting, like municipal elections? How do you find out how do you determine who's in charge?
Well, that's a really good question because that brings us back to the conversation around the CEO. It is a
Mhm.
democracy, quote unquote. I would caution heavily. Using the word democracy when I'm getting threatened legally. But there is voting. There was just an election that took place this spring where they are trying to advance themselves as a government. But then you're seeing elected officials suspended from the table indefinitely until they apologize to a CEO. So the CEO holds a lot of centralized power, in my opinion, and he's able to make those decisions. And that's where a lot of the questions come in because CEOs are not typical in government structures. So it's also new for us. And we're like, how do we actually ensure there's transparency when you can put that power into the hands of somebody like a CEO or a COO at the top and then hide behind the cloak of don't attack employees, don't attack private citizens, but they're playing central roles.
Right. From what I can understand outside looking in, they're sort of trying to make this a workplace harassment issue when it's simply people wanting to know where all the money's going. What sort of sent off red flags about the finances for you?
One of the biggest was red flags was when my regional representative told me that she has not been privy to his contract. So that was a
Oh,
major red flag for me when I'm like, you mean to tell me that you're sitting at the governance table as a member of the PMC, which is the Provincial Métis Council, as a former minister in that self-government as a regional representative, and she is not privy to that contract. She cannot look me in the face and tell me how much money that CEO makes a year. I understand that there are certain contracts and public employees, that are, I'm a civil public servant, that my salary was not public, but it wasn't a lot of money. But we know
right,
when you're a CEO, you're at the top level. And not only that, when I read the motion that was passed a couple months ago, stating that he is being given a payout because of those harassment allegations, that is published on their website as a motion to pay him out a settlement regarding those harassment allegations. How much was the settlement? Who did this investigation? What did they determine harassment is? And why is he still employed? I don't know any other instance where a government gives someone essentially hush money. Normally, you sign a release and see you later, not
right.
here's your money, and we're going to continue protecting you while these elected officials are still suspended from the table.
And so the elected officials get suspended from the table. People start asking questions. You're one of them. But I mean, it's normal people, it's prominent people. They want to know what's going on in the Métis government. And then you all, well, most of you, almost simultaneously get hit with a legal threat, cease and desist, shut up, you're harassing us. Uh, you know, what does that look like? Does it send a chill across everybody? You don't seem like you're being quiet, but I imagine there are a few people who are just like, I can't deal with this.
There are a few. I think that their hope was that this would scare people enough to silence them. I am privileged in the fact that I come with a lot of knowledge and expertise in governance, so it's really easy for me to debunk a lot of the arguments that are coming in, like saying, "Oh, don't harass a public citizen or a private citizen." But I mean, you have a CEO in your government. Most governments don't have CEOs, so it's
Right.
kind of the argument there. It's easy to kind of dismantle some of that. But for me, it is concerning because there are a lot of conversations around Indigenous governance where there's the non-Indigenous people that are scared to ask questions because we've created this culture
Mhm.
of it's going against reconciliation, it's going against being a good ally. When you point fingers, you ask questions, but the corruption can almost breed in those type of environments that we're creating. So I also feel a sense of responsibility where it's like, well, as an Indigenous person and someone that's, paved my own way through life, I put myself through school, there's never been handouts. I've always worked hard. I own my own home. I almost feel this sense of responsibility to be one of the ones that comes in and says, whoa, 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 this is actually not right. Here is not only the questions I'm asking, but I want to give everyone the tools to ask those questions so that not only we have governance structures that function, but we also can be proud of what we're putting out there publicly that the rest of Canada and taxpayers are watching, because right now it's embarrassing. It feels embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is the right of every Canadian to know what their government's doing.
Mhm.
It just seems like such a basic thing. And then to find out people who are asking questions of the Métis Nation that they're getting hit with these cease and desist letters. Now, give me a Coles Notes version of what your cease and desist letter said.
Yeah, so it was actually like really a silly cease and desist in my most humble opinion
Mm,
because it came really quickly and I think they were very sloppy in the fact that there were two things that they are not happy with me about. The first is that I called him an unelected rando from Quebec. So that one is interesting because they're fighting about the fact that he's a private citizen. So yes, you are unelected. In my personal opinion, you're a rando. I don't know you. I don't know where you came
yeah,
from. And then from Quebec, even if you're from Quebec or Ontario or Alberta or BC, in anyone's minds, why is that defamation? Why are you upset that that's brought up?
that's
The second
accurate.
piece,
Like it's just a
yeah.
fact.
And then the second piece is they took from my Twitter thread where I said he was reportedly asked whether or not he was Métis, and he reportedly and allegedly said, "Not your kind of Métis." But they paraphrased in the cease and desist and said that I basically said he's not our kind of Métis, but that's not what I said. So it was very strange in that regard. And what was the most concerning was at the end when they told me that I am now barred from their meetings. So I have never signed a code of conduct. I have never been disruptive in any of their meetings. And, I have an older elder Métis grandmother that I can now no longer take to any Métis meeting because I will probably be kicked out. And if I don't comply, I'll probably be arrested. So
That is absolutely outrageous. And I saw you pointing out on your Facebook page that you have security clearance. You can wander the halls of the House of Commons of this country, and yet you can't go and find out what's going on at your local government.
yeah, being a previous staffer, I obviously don't have security clearance anymore, but I haven't broken the law since then. But
Right.
yes, I had, not the very top security clearance, but
Sure.
it was reliability clearance. I worked for a member of parliament. There's been times I've scanned in, went into the House of Commons, I've ran into ministers, I've crossed the halls with MPs, I've spoken face to face with national political party leaders. There's never been a concern there. I was just in the Premier of Saskatchewan's office during budget day with some chiefs that I work with. Never been an issue ever, but now at this level, I'm treated like a criminal. And I also would ask, is everyone that's involved in your governance structure also able to pass a security clearance? Have they, if they were to move to the federal government structure? That's a question I'd be willing to ask.